Hi, and welcome to the walkthrough video for Baconwulf by Karoryfer Samples. All the sounds you just heard come from it, and it's a bass guitar sample library with both extended range and extended techniques. Now, there's effects on that, though nothing fancy, just amp sims, reverb, high-pass and low-pass filters and compression. This is how the basic picked articulation sounds totally raw, no processing at all. So, a fairly bright sound with the strings grinding against the frets a bit, audible even with no distortion. The lowest string on this bass is a huge 0.190-inch diameter. It's tuned to E an octave below a standard bass guitar's standard low E most of the time, but we also recorded some techniques with it tuned down to C and even A. The picked technique has 4 velocity layers, and mostly 4 round robins, though the top velocity layer has 8 round robins except for the high register, so you can play these kinds of 8th note root bass lines without repeating the same sample. There are 3 different kinds of muting: palm muting, ghost notes muted with the fingering hand, and double muting with both hands. All have 4 round robins, and the palm muting also has 2 velocity layers with 8 round robins in the not so high range of the top layer. There are also hammer-ons and pull-offs. And 3 kinds of slides, sliding 2 frets both up and down, and big falls an octave down, or less than an octave in the extreme low register. Combined with the ghost notes, they can even get funky. There are harmonics, sampled chromatically using a capo to fill out the lower register and false harmonics to fill out the high, and they go up very high indeed, all the way up to the C above the keyboard range that's visible in the Sforzando interface. Fingering noises also get their own key switch, with low velocity notes triggering only the sound of the note being pressed down, and high velocity ones adding a hammer-on tail. That's the last key switch in the normal patch, and of course you can also load each articulation as its own separate patch. Weirder stuff in the complete key switch patch, which requires raising Sforzando's default RAM allowance before loading, starts with pick scrapes. There are more pick scrapes and their effects, and we'll get to those later, but this is a playable pick scrape with a short scrape leading into a note. You get pick stabs with 5 stab locations. And hits to the body while fingering a power chord. The keyboard here is split into 2 ranges. Down low, you get the bass with all 5 strings on it hit with a copper pipe, and up high with 3 strings on it and hit with the palm of the hand. There are multiple techniques using a screwdriver to make the sound. There's tapping the screwdriver on 1 string and 3 strings similarly split into ranges. And rubbing the strings with a screwdriver is a sort of combination of slide and bow. Again with 1 and 3 strings, and with the dynamics controlled not by velocity, but by mod wheel like both strings. You also get real bowing, including with the low string tuned down to a subterranean C, which sounds nothing like a bowed double bass, but it is good for drones. In the higher range of the keyboard, you have bowing on the bass with 3 strings tuned to a power chord, which sounds very different, rough and violent shorts, with dynamics back to being controlled by velocity. Up next, holding a note while whacking the body with the handle of a knife. I put quite a few dents in the finish doing that, and though the other strings were muted, they do still ring a little. Using the end of a glass bottle's neck as a pick. There is more of this bottle later in the effects articulation. And the copper pipe returns, this time used to hit the strings. And if you're familiar with our other libraries, you will not be surprised that next is bouncing the pipe off the strings like a dulcimer hammer. All these samples are included as unlocked WAV files, so you can also copy them and load them into any sampler as one-shots if you want to use this for old school industrial. We also used the pipe as a slide, including some extra high notes, again going above the visible display range a bit. But what if that's still too normal? Well, for that, I jammed the pipe under the strings and then plucked notes, which doesn't produce pitches that match the note being fretted at all, but it does have plenty of strange ringing overtones which vary wildly between notes. Again, there is more of that pipe later under the effects articulation, but next under the playable techniques you get 2 metal binder clips hanging from the next string and bouncing off the string that was played. And in case that's not noisy enough, there is also a tremolo plugged version. There's also a wooden clothespin used in a similar way, first between the pickups. And then between the bridge and the pickups, or if you want to be fancy, sul ponticello. This sounds a bit like natural acoustic overdrive, a little bit reminiscent of a balafon. Next, you get a piece of a paper plate between the strings for a short muted sound. And toilet paper jammed under the neck pickup. We recorded this and the previous articulation with 2 velocity layers because plucking the strings harder really changes the sound. Then you get another prepared bass technique where we ended up putting quite a few dents in the finish. Here, the bass guitar has 3 strings on it and is laying down on the ground, while I bow a double bass with its end pin resting on the body. So the recorded sound is the vibrations of the double bass transferred through the end pin to the body of the bass guitar to its strings and then captured by its pickups. There are long, short and tremolo bowed notes. The tremolo version is looped for infinite sustain. Then we get to the effects key switch, where you get pick scrapes looped for infinite sustain with one key for each string and recorded with 4 crossfaded dynamic layers. Sliding the fingers around each string, recorded similarly, plus shorter fingering squeaks. Punching the body with the strings open in the normal tuning, unlike the earlier playable body hits which had the strings tuned to a power chord. And with the strings muted. The pick stabs and bottle noises used for the note starts in the earlier playable articulations, by themselves and at full length. Plus more bottle noises looped for infinite sustain. And as promised, more copper pipe. There's the pipe getting dropped on the strings in multiple locations. And long samples of the pipe rolling down the strings until it rolls off the nut. And the last thing I recorded after loosening all the strings to take them off and put a normal set back on, some very detuned strumming. That's all the sounds, almost. There's also feedback, which in the effects articulation can be triggered by the body punches and by the E above the range of the visible keyboard display, where it just produces microphonic feedback. Many of the playable techniques can also produce feedback, and as usual with our instruments, it goes into microphonic feedback when you push the control high enough. Of course, this will sound more idiomatic with distortion, but even without any effects or processing, it's there. In more basic controls, there is a mono switch which is on by default. Switch it off to play chords. There is vibrato with humanization working like it usually does in our instruments. The vibrato also does tremolo, modulating the volume, and the swell control adds to the attack and release time, which is a good combination for drones. Also good for drone stuff is the unison control, which adds 2 extra voices with controllable width. Of course, it's not just for drones, you can use it with anything from the regular techniques to the effects, and the extra voices are high-passed to keep things from getting muddy. the final controls a release volume, which does what you'd expect, plus the alt releases button, which switches from the regular releases, which are the string being muted with the fingering hand, to noisy releases, which mute the strings with the side of the pick. And that's all the sounds and all the controls. The whole Baconwulf library adds up to over 4.8 gigabytes and is available from the Karoryfer Samples store. If you think that level of detail in sampling weird techniques on a bass guitar is a good idea, tell a friend. And if you don't have any friends, tell an enemy.